There's a kind of fear that doesn't come from physical danger, but from the quiet certainty that no matter how hard you try, you'll always be too much for anyone to handle. Elena had lived with that fear her entire life. She wasn't running from the man who just shattered her apartment door. She was running from the inevitability that she'd end up alone again. That her intensity, her depth, her uncontrollable emotions would always drive people away. But tonight, fear wore a different face, one with fists and rage and the promise of violence. And so she ran. If this story touches something deep inside you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from, and if you feel it was worth your time, consider becoming a member to get early access to our stories. Your support means everything. The rain fell in cold, heavy sheets, turning the narrow Roman streets into rivers of black glass. Elena's heels clattered against the cobblestones, each step sending sharp pain up her calves, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her soaked dress clinging to her body like a second skin. Behind her, she could hear Marco's voice, distorted by distance and rain, calling her name with that edge of possession that at first seemed like passion, but had slowly revealed itself as obsession. She'd tried to leave quietly. She'd packed one small bag, written a note, planned to disappear while he was at work. But Marco had come home early. He'd seen the suitcase, and the man who'd once sworn to love her gently had grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks and told her she wasn't going anywhere, that she belonged to him, that no one else would ever want someone like her anyway. Someone so intense, so exhausting. So much, he was right, a small voice whispered in the back of Elena's mind. Every man before Marco had said the same thing in different words. You feel too deeply. You care too much. You're overwhelming. Her mother had said it too. Why can't you just be calm, Elena? Why do you have to make everything so dramatic? She'd learned to apologize for her tears, for her passion, for the way her heart seemed to operate at a volume no one else could tolerate. She'd learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less. But it was never enough. She was never enough, or she was always too much. There was no in-between. A car horn blared. Elena jerked back, realizing she'd stumbled into the street. The Via Margutta was empty at this hour, just past midnight. The art galleries shuttered. The restaurants closed. Rain hammered the awnings, creating a thunderous percussion that almost drowned out Marco's approaching footsteps. She needed to move, needed to hide. Needed to. Elena spotted the sleek, black car idling at the corner, its engine purring like a waiting predator. The back door was slightly open, warm light spilling onto the wet pavement. A taxi. It had to be a taxi. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She just ran toward it and threw herself inside, slamming the door behind her. The interior was warm, leather seats still holding someone's body heat, the scent of expensive cologne, and something darker. Smoke, maybe, or whiskey. Elena collapsed against the seat, gasping, water streaming from her hair and clothes, creating puddles on the immaculate floor. "Get me out of here," she gasped. "Please, just drive. Anywhere. Just go." Silence. Elena's heart hammered. She looked up, and her breath caught. The man in the back seat beside her was not a driver waiting for a fare. He sat perfectly still, one arm draped along the back of the seat, the other holding a crystal glass of amber liquid. He was watching her with eyes so dark they seemed black in the dim light, his face all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like a blade. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire year's rent. His dark hair, slightly damp from the rain, pushed back from a face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, all classical Italian features and controlled power. "This isn't a taxi," he said. His voice was low, quiet, but it filled the entire space, carrying an authority that made Elena's spine straighten instinctively. Elena's mind raced. She'd just thrown herself into a stranger's car. A stranger who sat in the back of an idling vehicle at midnight, drinking whiskey, looking like he owned not just the car, but the entire city. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, but before she could move, Marco's voice cut through the rain outside. "Elena, I know you're out here. You can't hide from me." The man's gaze shifted to the window, then back to Elena. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those dark eyes. Interest, maybe, or calculation. "You're running from someone," he observed. It wasn't a question. Elena's whole body was shaking now, cold and fear and adrenaline mixing into something that made her teeth chatter. "Please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I'll get out." "I'm sorry," I thought. The man raised one hand, a simple gesture, but it silenced her immediately. Then he leaned forward slightly and spoke to the driver she hadn't even noticed in the front seat. "Drive." The car pulled away from the curb with such smooth acceleration that Elena barely felt it move. Through the rain-streaked window, she caught a glimpse of Marco emerging onto the street, his face twisted with rage, searching. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the rain and the city. Elena sat frozen, her heart still racing, not sure if she'd just escaped one danger only to trap herself in another. The man beside her took a slow sip of his whiskey, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. "What's your name?" he asked. His tone was almost gentle, but there was steel underneath it, something that suggested he was used to having his questions answered. "Elena," she whispered. Her voice sounded small, fragile. She hated how weak she sounded. The man nodded slowly, as if her name confirmed something he'd already suspected. "I'm Dante," he said. "And you, Elena, just got into the wrong car. Or perhaps exactly the right one. That depends on your perspective." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She was still trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand how her life had gone from carefully controlled to completely chaotic in the space of a single evening. The car moved through the rain-slicked streets with purpose, heading away from the center of Rome toward somewhere Elena didn't recognize. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, and she heard the tremor in her own voice. Dante set his glass in a holder, the gesture precise and controlled. "Somewhere safe," he replied, "at least for tonight. Then we'll see what happens next." Elena wanted to protest, wanted to demand he let her out, wanted to take back control of a situation that had spiraled so far beyond her grasp. But exhaustion was setting in, the adrenaline draining away and leaving only the cold reality of what she'd escaped and what she'd run toward. And beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, there was something else, something she couldn't quite name. This man, this Dante with his quiet authority and dangerous beauty, hadn't looked at her like she was too much. He'd looked at her like she was exactly what he'd been waiting for. The villa appeared through the rain like something from a dream, or maybe a nightmare. High walls, iron gates that opened silently at their approach, gardens that looked wild and carefully maintained at the same time. The car pulled under a covered entrance, and only when they stopped did Elena realize how hard she'd been gripping the door handle, her knuckles white, her whole body tensed for flight. Dante didn't move immediately. He simply sat there, studying her with that same measured intensity, and Elena felt stripped bare under his gaze, as if he could see every secret she'd ever tried to hide. "You're afraid," he said finally. Not a question, just a statement of fact. Elena's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't you be?" she shot back, and was surprised by the edge in her own voice. She'd spent so long trying to be softer, gentler, more palatable. But fear was making her sharp again, bringing back the thorns she'd learned to file down. Something shifted in Dante's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Perhaps. But I think you're not afraid of me, not really. I think you're afraid of what getting in this car means. That you made a choice without thinking it through. That you trusted your instincts instead of your logic. That you did something reckless, something your whole life has taught you not to do. Elena's breath caught. How could he possibly know that? She'd been in this car for maybe 10 minutes, and already he was reading her like she was written in a language only he understood. The door beside her opened, and a man in a dark suit stood waiting, holding an umbrella. Dante gestured toward the open door. "Come," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're soaked through and shaking. Let's get you dry and warm. Then we can talk about what happens next." Elena didn't have many options. She could refuse, could run out into the rain again, could try to find her way back to the apartment she'd fled, back to Marco and his possessive rage. Or she could follow this stranger into his home and trust that whatever danger he represented was less immediate than the one she'd just escaped. She chose to follow. Inside, the villa was all dark wood and stone, high ceilings that swallowed sound, artwork that even Elena's untrained eye recognized as valuable. Everything spoke of old money, old power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. A woman appeared, older, severe-looking but with kind eyes, and Dante spoke to her in rapid Italian too quick for Elena to follow. The woman nodded and approached Elena with a gentleness that made tears suddenly threaten. "Come, Cara," she said in accented English. "Let's get you into dry clothes." Elena followed her up a curved staircase, down a hallway, lined with family portraits, people with Dante's same sharp features staring down at her through centuries. The room she was led to was larger than her entire apartment, with a 4-poster bed and windows that overlooked the rain-drenched gardens. The woman, who introduced herself as Maria, brought thick towels, a robe made of material so soft it felt like wearing a cloud, and promised to bring tea. When she left, Elena finally allowed herself to break. She sat on the edge of the massive bed and let the tears come, silent and hot, streaming down her face, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. She'd been so stupid, so reckless, jumping into a stranger's car because she was afraid, because she was desperate, because for once in her life she'd acted on pure instinct instead of carefully calculated caution. And now she was here, in this beautiful prison, at the mercy of a man who looked at her like he could see straight through to her soul. Maria returned with tea and a tray of food, small, delicate pastries, and fruit. Things Elena couldn't imagine eating, but that smelled divine. She also brought clothes, real clothes, not just the robe. A simple black dress, soft and well-made, undergarments still wrapped, everything in exactly Elena's size. "How did he know?" Elena asked, holding up the dress. Maria smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Il capo knows everything," she said simply. Then she left Elena alone again. Elena showered, standing under water so hot it turned her skin pink, washing away the rain and the fear and Marco's touch. She scrubbed until she felt raw, until she felt clean, until she felt like maybe she could breathe again. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves without constraining them, falling to just below her knees. She dried her hair as best she could, leaving it in damp waves around her shoulders, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked different somehow, less controlled, more real. The woman staring back at her had wild eyes and flushed cheeks, and the kind of beauty that came from surviving something, from choosing to run instead of stay, from being brave even when it meant being stupid. When she finally descended the stairs, her feet bare on the cold marble, she found Dante waiting in a room lined with books, a fire crackling in an enormous fireplace. He'd changed, too, into dark slacks and a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. He stood at the window, looking out at the rain, and didn't turn when she entered. "Sit," he said quietly. "Please." Elena sat in one of the leather chairs near the fire, tucking her legs beneath her, accepting the warmth gratefully. Dante finally turned, and in the firelight his face looked different, less harsh, more human. He poured himself another glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter, then raised an eyebrow at her in question. Elena shook her head. He sat across from her, stretching out in his chair like a satisfied predator. "Tell me about the man you were running from," he said. Elena's hands tightened in her lap. "Why do you care?" "Because you're in my home now, under my protection, whether you intended to be or not. And I don't offer protection blindly." Elena studied him, trying to understand what game they were playing, what rules governed this strange new world she'd stumbled into. "His name is Marco," she said finally. "We've been together for 8 months. He seemed perfect at first, attentive, passionate. But then he started saying I was too much, too emotional, too intense. He wanted me quieter, smaller, more manageable. Tonight I tried to leave. He didn't take it well." Dante's expression didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. "Did he hurt you?" Elena hesitated. The marks on her wrist were already darkening to bruises. "Not really," she said. "Not yet. But he would have. I could see it in his face." Dante took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Men who want to make women smaller are afraid," he said. "They're afraid that if the woman stands at her full height, she'll tower over them. They're afraid they're not enough, so they convince her she's too much. It's cowardice dressed as concern." Elena felt something crack open in her chest. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Everyone had always agreed with Marco, with the others before him, with her mother. The problem was her intensity, her emotions, her inability to just be calm. "You don't know me," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Dante agreed. "But I know women like you. Women who feel everything so deeply the world tells them it's a flaw. Women who love with such ferocity it frightens people. Women who would burn down the whole world for something they believe in. The world tries to tame women like that. Put them in boxes, dim their fire." Itwam leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes holding hers captive. "But fire that's been dimmed doesn't go out, Elena. It just waits for someone who isn't afraid of getting burned." Elena couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, the villa too strange. Every creak and whisper of wind made her heart race, made her imagine Marco somehow finding her here, breaking through those iron gates and stone walls. But that wasn't really what kept her awake. It was Dante's words, circling through her mind like a prayer she didn't know she'd been waiting to hear. Fire that's been dimmed doesn't go out. It just waits for someone who isn't afraid of getting burned. She'd spent her entire life apologizing for her fire, trying to contain it, smother it, make it something acceptable. And here was this dangerous stranger telling her the fire wasn't the problem. Around 3 in the morning, Elena gave up on sleep. She wrapped herself in the soft robe Maria had left and padded barefoot through the darkened halls, following instinct and the faint smell of smoke. She found Dante in what looked like a study, seated behind a massive desk, papers spread before him, a single lamp casting warm light over his concentrated face. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "Too much quiet," she admitted, then felt foolish. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Dante replied, setting down the pen he'd been holding. "You've been living with noise, with chaos, with someone who kept you constantly on edge. Quiet feels dangerous now, like something's about to break it. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Elena hesitated, then entered the room, settling into the chair and tucking her feet beneath her again. "What are you working on?" she asked, nodding toward the papers. "Things that don't concern you," he said, but his tone was gentle, almost amused. "Business. The kind that's best conducted in the middle of the night when the rest of the world is sleeping." Elena studied him in the lamplight. He looked tired, she realized, not physically exhausted, but carrying a weariness that went deeper into the soul. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked. "Not often," Dante admitted. "Sleep requires letting your guard down. That's a luxury some of us can't afford." There was something in the way he said it, something that made Elena recognize a kindred wound. "You're alone, too," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Dante's eyes met hers, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing something raw beneath. "Everyone's alone, Elena. Some of us just hide it better than others." "No," Elena said, surprising herself with her certainty. "That's not what I mean. You're alone the same way I am. Not because there's no one around, but because no one sees you. They see what you do, or what you have, or what they think you are. But they don't see you." Dante's jaw tightened. "What makes you think you see me?" "I don't," Elena admitted. "But I recognize the shape of the armor. I wear it too." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who've both lived in the same kind of darkness, even if they arrived there by different roads. Finally, Dante spoke, his voice quieter than she'd heard it before. "My father built an empire," he said, "not through kindness or negotiation, through fear, through violence, through being the man everyone else was afraid to cross. When he died, I inherited that empire. Not because I wanted it, but because I was the eldest son. Because it was expected. Because there was no other choice." He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Everyone sees the power, the wealth, the control. They don't see the cage. They don't see that I stopped being a person and became a position, a title, a weapon to be aimed and fired." Elena felt her heart constrict. It was different from her own wound, but the shape was the same. The feeling of being reduced to one thing, one aspect, while the rest of you withered from neglect. "When was the last time someone asked you what you wanted?" she asked. "Not what you should do, or what's best for business, or what's expected. Just what you wanted?" Dante looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pain. "I was 17, he said finally. "My mother asked me what I wanted for my birthday. I told her I wanted to study music." She laughed, not cruelly, just like it was a joke. A week later, she was dead. After that, no one ever asked again. "Music," Elena breathed. "You wanted to study music?" Dante's smile was bitter. "Ridiculous, isn't it? The heir to a criminal empire wanting to compose symphonies." "It's not ridiculous," Elena said fiercely. "It's the most human thing I've heard since I got here. It's the first thing you've said that sounds like you instead of the role you're playing." Dante stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to her. "You should go back to bed," he said, and his voice had gone cold again, distant. "Tomorrow I'll arrange for you to have money, documents, whatever you need to start fresh somewhere far from here. Far from Marco. You'll be safe. You don't have to do that," Elena said. "I do," Dante replied, "because keeping you here would be selfish. You stumbled into my world by accident. That doesn't mean you should stay in it." Elena stood too, crossing the room until she was standing behind him, close enough to feel the tension radiating from his body. "What if I want to stay?" she asked quietly. You don't, Dante said, not turning. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what my world is. You don't know me. Elena felt something ignite in her chest, that fire she'd spent so long trying to bank. You're right, she said. I don't know you. But I know what it feels like to be told what you should want, what you should feel, what you should be. And I'm done with that. I'm done with people deciding for me what's good for me. She moved around him, forcing him to look at her. You said women like me burn too bright, that the world tries to dim us. Well, maybe I'm tired of being dimmed. Maybe I want to see what happens if I burn. Dante's eyes searched hers, and she saw the war happening behind them, the desire to push her away warring with something else, something hungry and desperate and lonely. Elena, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a warning. I'm not a good man. The things I've done, the things I do, they would horrify you. Maybe, Elena said, or maybe I'm more capable of handling darkness than anyone's ever given me credit for. Maybe that's part of what makes everyone uncomfortable. Not just that I feel too much, but that I'm not afraid of hard truths. I'm not afraid of complicated people. I'm not afraid of you. You should be, Dante said. But his voice had gone rough, and he'd moved closer without seeming to realize it. Why? Elena challenged. Because you're dangerous? Because you're powerful? Because you've done things you're not proud of? She stepped closer still, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, could smell that dark scent of whiskey and smoke and something uniquely him. Everyone has darkness, Dante. Some people just hide it better. At least you're honest about yours. Dante's hand came up, his fingers brushing her jawline with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him. You have no idea what you're asking for, he whispered. Then show me, Elena whispered back. Stop protecting me from choices I'm capable of making myself. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her, could see the desire burning in those dark eyes, could feel the tension thrumming between them like a living thing. But then he stepped back, breaking the connection, and the loss of his warmth felt like a physical blow. Go to bed, Elena, he said, turning away again. Tomorrow we'll figure out what happens next. But tonight, just go to bed. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to push, wanted to make him see that she wasn't fragile, wasn't something that would break under the weight of his darkness. But she also recognized the sound of a man at the edge of his control, a man fighting himself as much as he was fighting her. So she left, padding silently back through the dark halls to the too soft bed in the too quiet room. But as she lay there, watching dawn slowly paint the sky outside her window, she smiled. Because for the first time in her life, someone had seen her fire and hadn't asked her to dim it. He'd just asked her if she was sure she wanted to burn. And Elena was very, very sure. Morning came with soft light and the smell of coffee. Elena woke to Maria knocking gently on her door, entering with a tray that held not just breakfast, but clothes, beautiful clothes, still with tags attached. Il Capo says you may need these, Maria said with that same small, knowing smile. He has business today. You are to rest, to be comfortable. If you need anything, you ask me, see? Elena nodded, still half asleep, still processing the strange dream her life had become. After Maria left, Elena explored the tray. Fresh cornetti, still warm, with butter and jam. Fruit that looked like it had been picked that morning. Coffee that smelled divine, and beneath the plate, a note in precise masculine handwriting. Stay. Not forever. Just until it's safe. You owe me nothing, but you deserve peace. Consider this a gift. No strings attached. Dante. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she held the note. No strings attached. He was giving her space, giving her choice, giving her the thing she'd been denied for so long, the freedom to decide for herself what happened next. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying to remember the last time she'd had breakfast that wasn't rushed or anxious or overshadowed by Marco's moods. Then she showered again, dressed in the clothes that fit too perfectly to be coincidence. Dante must have had someone assess her size last night, must have sent people out in the middle of the night to buy her an entire wardrobe. The thought should have been creepy. Instead, it felt like being seen, like being valued, like mattering. She spent the morning exploring the villa, discovering room after room filled with beautiful things. A library with books in multiple languages, leather-bound volumes that looked ancient and precious. A music room with a piano and various string instruments, all meticulously maintained. When Elena touched the piano keys, they sang out pure and clear, and she wondered if Dante ever came here, if he ever allowed himself to play the music he'd wanted to study, or if that dream had died completely when his mother did. She found herself drawn back to his study, to the desk where they'd talked in the middle of the night. His papers were gone now, locked away somewhere, but his presence lingered in the scent of whiskey and the indent in the leather chair. Maria found her there, standing by the window, looking out at the gardens that were emerald green and impossibly lush in the morning light. "You want to walk outside?" Maria asked. "It's safe. Il Capo, he makes everything safe." Elena followed her out into the gardens, and the beauty of it took her breath away. Roses climbed ancient stone walls, their perfume heavy and sweet. Lemon trees, heavy with fruit, lined gravel paths. Fountains murmured and splashed, their water clear as crystal. It was a paradise, carefully maintained, protected from the outside world by high walls and locked gates. A beautiful cage, Elena thought, and understood Dante a little better. They walked in comfortable silence, Maria occasionally pointing out a flower or tree, sharing small stories about the villa, about Dante's family, about the weight of history these walls contained. "You care about him," Elena said finally. It wasn't a question. Maria paused by a fountain, trailing her fingers through the water. "I knew him when he was a boy," she said, "before his father finished breaking him, before he learned to wear the mask. He was sweet then, gentle. He cried when he found a bird with a broken wing, spent weeks nursing it back to health." She looked at Elena, her eyes sharp and assessing. His father beat him for that. Said it made him weak. Said men in our world cannot afford gentleness. Elena felt something twist in her chest. "But he kept the music room," she said softly. "He keeps everything his mother loved," Maria confirmed. "Even though it hurts him to look at them. Even though it reminds him of what he lost. That is who he is underneath. Someone who keeps beautiful things close, even when they cause pain." They walked back to the villa as the sun climbed higher, and Elena felt the weight of understanding settling over her. Dante wasn't just powerful and dangerous. He was wounded in the same way she was, told to cut away parts of himself to fit a role, to meet expectations, to survive in a world that had no room for complexity. When they entered the house, Maria tensed. Men's voices echoed from somewhere deeper inside, speaking rapid Italian, the tone sharp and urgent. Maria's face went carefully blank. "You should go to your room, Cara," she said quietly. "When Il Capo has business visitors, it is better to not be seen." But Elena had never been good at doing what she should do. Instead, she followed the voices, moving quietly through the halls until she could hear clearly. Dante's voice, cold and commanding. "She's not a problem. She's under my protection. That's all you need to know." Another voice, rougher, skeptical. A girl shows up out of nowhere. You take her into your home, and we're just supposed to accept that? What if she's working for someone? What if this is a setup? There was a sound, like something hitting a table, hard. "Watch your tone," Dante said, and the temperature in his voice could have frozen fire. "I don't answer to you. I don't explain myself to you. She stays. That's final." Elena leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She shouldn't be hearing this. She was intruding on something dangerous, something she didn't understand. But she couldn't make herself leave. "Boss," a third voice, younger, more cautious. "We're just concerned. The Rossi family has been making moves. The territorial disputes are getting worse. Having an unknown woman here, it's a vulnerability. Someone could use her against you." "I'd like to see them try," Dante said. And there was something dark in his voice now, something that sent shivers down Elena's spine. "Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. Am I clear?" There was a chorus of assents, but Elena could hear the unease beneath them. She backed away quietly, her mind racing. She'd known on some level that Dante was involved in something illegal, something dangerous. You didn't live in a villa like this, with guards and gates, and that level of authority in your voice, without being part of something outside the law. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the casual discussion of territorial disputes and threats, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She was back in her room, sitting on the edge of the bed, when Dante knocked on her door an hour later. He entered without waiting for her answer, and his face was tight with tension. "You heard," he said. "Not a question." Elena nodded. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have listened." "No," Dante said, closing the door behind him. "You should have. You should know exactly what you're in the middle of." He crossed to the window, that same restless energy from last night, evident in every line of his body. "I told you I'm not a good man, Elena. I meant it. The things I do, the world I operate in, it's violent. It's ruthless. People die. That's the reality." Elena's mouth was dry. "Are you trying to scare me away?" "I'm trying to be honest with you," Dante said, turning to face her. "Because last night you said you weren't afraid of my darkness. But you should be." Elena stood, moving toward him slowly. "Tell me something," she said. "When you took me in, when you protected me, was that just business? Strategy? Keeping potential vulnerabilities under your control?" Dante's jaw tightened. "No." "Then why?" Elena pressed. "Why protect some stranger who threw herself into your car? Why buy me clothes and give me a room and tell your men I'm under your protection? Why do any of it if I mean nothing to you?" Dante looked at her, and the mask cracked, revealing something raw and desperate beneath. "Because when I looked at you, terrified and soaked through and trying so hard to be brave, I saw myself," he said, his voice rough. "I saw someone running from people who wanted to make them smaller. Someone who'd been told they were too much their whole life. And I thought maybe for once I could use the power I hate for something good. Maybe I could protect someone instead of destroying them." Elena's eyes burned with unshed tears. "You see it too," she whispered. "The same wound. We're both walking around half alive, playing roles, pretending to be what the world demands, while the real us suffocates underneath." Dante's hands clenched at his sides, like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You should leave, Elena. Today. I'll set you up somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. You can start over. Be whoever you want to be. Without me." "Why without you?" Elena asked, closing the distance between them. "Because I'll ruin you," Dante said, and his voice broke on the words. "Everything I touch turns dark. Everyone close to me ends up hurt. I won't do that to you. I won't be another person who makes you smaller." Elena reached up, framing his face with her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You said fire that's been dimmed doesn't go out," she said softly. "Maybe darkness that's been forced into shadows doesn't disappear either. Maybe it just waits for someone who can see it and isn't afraid." His hands came up to cover hers, his grip almost desperate. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Then show me," Elena said again. "Stop protecting me from my own choices. Let me decide if your darkness is too much. Let me be the one who stays." And Dante, this man who controlled empires and commanded fear, who'd built walls so high around himself that no one had gotten close in years, finally broke. He kissed her, and it was nothing gentle, nothing patient. It was desperation and hunger, and years of loneliness compressed into a single point of contact. And Elena kissed him back with all the fire she'd been told to dim, all the passion she'd been told was too much, all the intensity that made her who she was. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante pressed his forehead to hers, his hand still framing her face, like she was something precious he was afraid to drop. "This is a mistake," he whispered, but he didn't move away. "Probably," Elena agreed, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. "But I'm tired of making safe choices. I'm tired of being who I'm supposed to be instead of who I am." "What if who you are can't survive in my world?" Dante asked. "What if I destroy the very thing about you that made me want to protect you in the first place?" Elena pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "What if you don't? What if for once someone sees all of you, the violence and the tenderness, the power and the pain, and doesn't ask you to choose between them?" Dante's thumb traced her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. "I've never been with someone who wasn't afraid of me," he admitted. "Never been with someone who saw past the title, the reputation, the wealth. They wanted the fantasy, not the reality. They wanted the power without the darkness. They couldn't hold both. I'm not them," Elena said simply. "And you're not Marco. You're not every man who told me I was too much. Maybe we're both exactly what the other needs. Someone who doesn't ask us to be smaller." Dante searched her eyes for a long moment. "If you stay," he said slowly, "you need to understand what that means. It means danger. It means my enemies become your enemies. It means living in a world where violence is always one decision away. It means being with a man who's done terrible things and will likely do more. Can you live with that?" Elena thought about it, really thought about it. Could she live with loving someone dangerous? Someone who operated outside the laws that governed normal people? Could she reconcile the gentleness she saw in his eyes with the ruthlessness his men spoke of? Maybe not, a voice whispered. Maybe this was exactly the kind of reckless intensity that everyone had always warned her about. But then she remembered Marco, who'd been perfectly normal, perfectly legal, perfectly acceptable, and who'd made her feel like her very existence was a burden. She remembered every man before him who'd promised to love her, and then asked her to change. She remembered her mother's disappointed sighs, her friend's concern, the therapist who'd suggested maybe she needed medication to calm her emotions. Everyone who'd ever made her feel like the problem was her. "I can live with it," Elena said. "The question is, can you live with me? Because I'm going to ask questions you don't want to answer. I'm going to push boundaries you're used to controlling. I'm going to bring emotion into spaces where you're used to cold calculation. I'm going to be exactly as much as I am, and I won't apologize for it." Dante's eyes darkened, and she saw something shift in his expression. Something that looked like relief, like recognition, like finally coming home. "I don't want you to apologize," he said. "I don't want you smaller. I want you exactly as you are, even when it terrifies me. Especially when it terrifies me. because you're right. We are the same. Both of us forced to hide who we really are. Both of us starving for someone who can see us completely and stay anyway." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, and Elena felt something unlock inside her chest. This was what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not someone who tolerated her intensity, but someone who matched it. Not someone who could handle her fire, but someone who burned just as bright. They spent the rest of the day together, talking in ways neither had talked to anyone in years. Dante told her about his mother, about finding her body after his father's rivals had made their point, about the way the light went out of his world that day and never quite came back. He told her about the first time he'd killed someone, how it had destroyed him and remade him into something harder, colder, something that could survive in the world his father had left him. He told her about the music room, how he sometimes sat at the piano at 3 a.m. and played pieces no one would ever hear, how it was the only time he felt like himself. Elena told him about her childhood, about being the daughter who felt too much in a family that valued control, about crying at movies and books and beautiful sunsets, while her mother looked on with barely concealed disappointment. She told him about the string of relationships that had all ended the same way, with men who'd initially been drawn to her passion, but eventually found it exhausting. She told him about Marco, about how he'd seemed different at first, how he'd said he loved her intensity, until the day he didn't anymore, until the day he told her she needed to change, or he was leaving, and how she'd tried, God, how she'd tried to be what he wanted, until she couldn't recognize herself anymore, until running into the rain seemed easier than staying one more day. As night fell, they found themselves in the music room, Dante at the piano, Elena curled in a chair nearby, watching his fingers move across the keys. He played something achingly beautiful, something that sounded like loneliness and longing and hope all woven together. When the last notes faded, Elena wiped tears from her cheeks. "Did you write that?" she asked. "When I was 17, Dante said, his fingers still resting on the keys. "The week after my mother died, before I understood that I'd never get to be the person who wrote music. It was supposed to be a requiem for her, but it turned into a requiem for myself, for the life I'd never have." "Play another," Elena requested softly. "Please." So he did. He played piece after piece, some classical, some his own compositions, each one revealing another layer of the man beneath the mask. And Elena listened, understanding that this was a gift, that he was showing her something no one else got to see, something sacred and vulnerable and real. When he finally stopped, the moon was high outside the windows, casting silver light across the dark wood floors. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked. "Choosing this life?" "I didn't choose it," Dante said quietly. "It chose me. But yes, I regret it. Every day. Every time I have to make a decision that costs someone their life. Every time I look in the mirror and see my father staring back. Every time I think about what I could have been if I'd been born into a different family, a different world." Elena rose and came to sit beside him on the piano bench, their bodies touching from shoulder to hip. "Maybe it's not too late," she said. "Maybe you can still be that person, even if it's just in pieces. Even if it's just here, in this room, in the middle of the night. Maybe that's enough." "It's not enough," Dante said, but there was no heat in it, just resignation. "But it's all I have." "What if it could be more?" Elena asked, her hand finding his on the keys. "What if you didn't have to be just one thing? What if you could be both the man your father made you and the man your mother hoped you'd become?" Dante turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his face was stripped of its usual guardedness. "Is that what you want?" he asked. To reform me? To save me? No, Elena said firmly. I don't want to save you. I just want to see you. All of you. The violence and the music. The ruthlessness and the gentleness. The fear and the hope. I want to know all the parts you think you have to hide. Dante's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. No one's ever wanted that before, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Everyone wants the power, or they want the fantasy of who I could be if I weren't this. But never both. Never all of it. Then they didn't deserve you, Elena said. Because you're not just one thing, Dante. You're complicated and contradictory, and sometimes those contradictions are going to clash. But that's what makes you human. That's what makes you real. Dante kissed her again, and this time it was different. Not desperate, not hungry, but reverent. Like she was something holy he'd been searching for his entire life. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to be with someone who sees me. It terrifies me. Good, Elena said, smiling through her own tears. I'm terrified too. But maybe that means it matters. Maybe that means it's real. They stayed like that, wrapped around each other on the piano bench, until the moon moved across the sky and dawn started painting the horizon pink. And in that music room, surrounded by instruments that held voices waiting to be heard, two people who'd spent their lives being told they were too much finally found someone who was enough. Dante carried Elena to his room as the sun rose, laying her gently on sheets that smelled like him, and they held each other, not yet ready for more, just needing the confirmation that this was real, that the other person wasn't going to disappear with the darkness. This is dangerous, Dante murmured into her hair. Not just the world I live in. This. Us. What we're becoming. I know, Elena whispered back, but I'd rather be in danger with you than safe with anyone else. That's insane, Dante said, but she could hear the smile in his voice. Probably, Elena agreed, but I've never been good at being sane. Days turned into weeks, and Elena learned the rhythms of Dante's world. The early morning meetings conducted in Italian, his voice cold and commanding as he made decisions that affected people's lives. The afternoons when he'd find her in the library or the garden, and his face would soften, the mask slipping away until he was just a man who was tired of being strong. The nights when they'd talk for hours, or make love slowly in his enormous bed, learning each other's bodies and hearts in equal measure. Maria watched it all with quiet approval, and Elena understood she'd become something unexpected in this house. Not a prisoner, not a guest, but something else entirely. A presence that made the villa feel less like a fortress and more like a home. But danger was never far away. Elena learned to recognize the signs, the way Dante's jaw would tighten when his phone rang with certain numbers, the increased security, more men with weapons barely concealed beneath their jackets, the nights when he'd come to bed tense and distant, the violence of his day clinging to him like smoke. She learned not to ask direct questions, but to wait, to let him come to her when he was ready, to hold space for whatever darkness he needed to process. And slowly, he began to let her in, began to talk about the impossible choices his position forced him to make. The territory disputes with rival families that could only be resolved through violence, the loyalty he demanded from his men because disloyalty meant death, for them and for him. One night, 3 weeks after Elena had stumbled into his car, Dante came home with blood on his hands, actual blood, streaked across his knuckles, staining the cuffs of his white shirt. Elena was reading in his study when he entered, and she looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his face a careful blank, but his eyes hollow. She set down her book slowly. "Are you hurt?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. "No," Dante said. The blood isn't mine. Elena stood, approaching him carefully. Do you want to talk about it? No, Dante said again, but he didn't move away when she reached for his hands, turning them over to examine the damage. Come on, Elena said gently. Let's get you cleaned up. She led him to his bathroom, running warm water in the sink, carefully washing the blood from his hands. Dante stood still, watching her work, and Elena could feel the tension radiating from him, the war happening behind his eyes. Someone betrayed us, he said finally, his voice flat. Someone I trusted. Someone I considered a friend. What happened? Elena asked quietly, not sure she wanted to know, but sensing he needed to say it. I killed him, Dante said bluntly. That's what happens to betrayal in my world. No trials, no second chances. Just blood and silence. Elena's hand stilled for a moment, the full reality of his life washing over her. Then she continued cleaning, rinsing away the evidence of violence with steady hands. Are you going to leave? Dante asked, and his voice was carefully neutral, but Elena could hear the fear underneath. Leave? Elena looked up at him. Why would I leave? Because I just told you I killed someone, Dante said. Because you're standing here washing a dead man's blood off my hands. Because any sane person would run. Elena finished cleaning his hands, then dried them carefully with a soft towel. Dante, she said, meeting his eyes, I'm not leaving because you did something terrible. I'm not leaving because your world is violent. I'm staying because even covered in blood, even after doing something that destroyed a piece of your soul, you still came home to me. You still let me see you. You still trust me enough to tell me the truth instead of hiding behind comfortable lies. Dante's eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall. How can you still look at me like that? He asked. Like I'm someone worth loving? Because you are, Elena said simply. Not despite the darkness, but with it. You think the blood on your hands makes you unlovable, but all I see is a man who carries impossible weight and somehow hasn't been crushed by it yet. All I see is someone who kills to protect what's his, who plays piano at 3 a.m. because he still believes in beauty, who looks at me like I'm the only real thing in a world full of illusions. That's who you are, Dante. All of it. Together. Dante pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, and his whole body shook with silent sobs. No one had ever held him while he fell apart. No one had ever stayed through the worst of him. They stood like that until the shaking stopped, until Dante's breathing evened out, until he could pull back and look at her with red-rimmed eyes and something like wonder on his face. I love you, he said, and the word sounded like a confession. I love you, and it terrifies me because everyone I love ends up hurt. Elena cupped his face between her hands. Then I guess I'll just have to be the exception, she said. Dante laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. You can't promise that. You're right, Elena agreed. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere. I can promise that whatever happens, we face it together. That's all anyone can promise. Dante kissed her, tasting like salt and desperation, and something that might have been hope. They made love that night, with a new intensity, an urgency born from understanding just how fragile everything was, how quickly it could all be taken away. The next morning, Dante made a decision. He called a meeting of his top men, and for the first time, Elena was invited to attend. She sat quietly in the corner of the room while Dante conducted business, watching him transform into the cold, commanding figure his position required. But now she could see beneath it, could see the effort it took to maintain that mask, could see the moments when his eyes would flick to her, seeking anchor. After the meeting, when it was just the two of them again, Dante explained. They need to know you're not just some woman I'm protecting, he said. They need to understand you're mine. That hurting you means declaring war on me personally. That you're under my protection, permanently." "Is that what I am?" Elena asked, amused. "Yours?" Dante's eyes darkened with possession and something deeper. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And I'm yours. Completely. Irrevocably. In ways that should probably terrify us both." Elena crossed to where he stood, wrapping her arms around him, feeling his heart beat steady and strong against her chest. "Then I guess we're both insane," she said, "because I wouldn't have it any other way." They spent the afternoon in the garden, Dante teaching her about the different plants his mother had loved, sharing stories about his childhood that he'd never told anyone. Elena told him about her dreams of writing, about the poetry she used to compose, but never showed anyone because Marco had said it was self-indulgent and immature. Dante made her promise to share it with him, to let him read the words she'd kept hidden. That evening, as they sat together watching the sun set over the Roman hills, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Peace. For the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to be smaller, quieter, less. She was exactly as much as she was, and she was loved for it. Not despite her intensity, but because of it. She looked at Dante, at this complicated, dangerous, tender man who'd somehow become her home, and she understood what her mother had never been able to grasp. Love wasn't about fitting into someone else's idea of who you should be. It was about finding someone whose edges matched yours, whose darkness complemented your light, whose wounds aligned with yours in ways that created unexpected strength. "You're thinking too loud," Dante murmured, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Sorry," Elena said, smiling, just realizing. "I'm happy." The word felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar after so long. "Happy," Dante repeated, as if testing the word himself. "Happy?" "Yes," Elena confirmed. "Dangerously, recklessly, probably shouldn't be happy. But happy nonetheless." Dante pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then I guess we're both insane," he echoed her earlier words. "Because I'm happy too. And I didn't think I'd ever get to say that and mean it." They stayed like that until the stars came out. Two people who'd been told their whole lives they were too much, finally finding someone who was enough. And in the villa that had been a prison, and then became a refuge, love grew in the spaces between violence and music, darkness and light, fear and hope, not despite the contradictions, but because of them. 3 months after that rainy night, Elena woke to find Dante already dressed, standing by the window of their bedroom, his silhouette dark against the morning light. She'd learned his moods by now, could read the tension in his shoulders, the careful stillness that meant his mind was racing through scenarios and calculations. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up, the sheets pooling around her waist. Dante didn't turn immediately. "There's something I need to tell you," he said finally. "Something I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Elena asked, a cold tendril of fear curling in her stomach. "That you'd leave," Dante said simply. "That when you understood the full reality of what being with me means, you'd realize you'd made a mistake." Elena got out of bed, wrapping herself in his shirt from the night before, and crossed to stand beside him. "Tell me," she said. "Whatever it is, just tell me." Dante's jaw tightened. "Marco, your ex, he found out where you are. Found out you're with me. He's been making threats, trying to rally support, claiming I stole something that belonged to him. He's talking to my enemies, trying to use you as leverage." Elena's blood went cold. "When did you find out?" 2 weeks ago, Dante admitted, and guilt flickered across his face. "I've been handling it, keeping him away from you. But yesterday, he escalated. He went to the press, started spreading stories. About you, about us, about what he claims I am. And what does he claim you are? Elena asked, though she could guess. A monster, Dante said flatly. A criminal who kidnapped an innocent woman, who's holding you against your will. He's painting himself as the concerned ex trying to rescue you from a dangerous situation. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so dangerous. Elena felt anger burn through the fear. So what happens now? Now I end it, Dante said, and there was something cold in his voice, something that reminded Elena exactly who he was beyond their private moments. I've been trying to handle this quietly, trying to keep you out of it. But Marco won't stop. He won't let go, which means I have to make him. Elena's heart was pounding. What does that mean exactly? It means, Dante said, carefully, that I'm going to give you a choice. The first real choice since all this started. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were full of pain and determination in equal measure. You can leave, he said. I'll set you up somewhere safe, somewhere far from here, far from me, far from Marco. New identity, new life, enough money to start over completely. You'll be free. Or, and his voice dropped lower, you can stay. But if you stay, you stand beside me publicly. You tell the world that you're here by choice, that you love me, that Marco's claims are lies. You become part of my world officially, permanently, with all the danger and darkness that entails. And I'll deal with Marco in the way my world deals with threats. Elena's mind raced. He was offering her an out, one last chance to walk away before the point of no return. But he was also asking her to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. What will you do to Marco? She asked. Dante's expression didn't change. What I have to do to protect what's mine, he said. To protect you. To make sure he can never hurt you again. Never use you against me. Never threaten our life together. Elena understood what he wasn't saying. Understood that choosing to stay meant accepting the violence that came with it. Meant living with the knowledge that her choice would lead to Marco's death. Could she do that? Could she condemn a man to death? Even a man who'd hurt her, who'd tried to make her smaller, who'd put his hands on her in anger? She thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, terrified and soaked through, running through rain-slicked streets. She thought about how Marco had made her feel, like her very existence was a burden, like loving her was a chore he was generously willing to undertake as long as she behaved. She thought about the woman she was now, standing in Dante's shirt in their shared bedroom, no longer apologizing for her fire, no longer dimming herself to make others comfortable. She thought about the life they'd built in this villa, the way Dante looked at her, like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking years ago, the way she'd found herself in losing herself in him. And she made her choice. I'm staying, Elena said, her voice steady. I'm staying, and I'll stand beside you. I'll tell the world I'm here by choice, that I love you, that I chose this life. And whatever you need to do to keep us safe, I trust you to do it. Dante closed his eyes, and she saw his whole body sag with relief and dread in equal measure. Elena, he said, his voice rough, you understand what you're saying? You understand what this means? I understand, Elena said, closing the distance between them, taking his face in her hands. I understand that in your world, threats are eliminated, not negotiated with. I understand that Marco won't stop until he's stopped permanently. And I understand that choosing you means accepting all of you, including the parts that do terrible things for good reasons. Dante pulled her against him, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. I love you, he said into her hair. I love you, and I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice. I won't regret it, Elena said with certainty. Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of what I should want. I'm choosing the person who sees me completely, instead of the person who's acceptable to everyone else. That's not something to regret. That's something to fight for. 2 days later, Elena stood beside Dante at a press conference, wearing a dress he'd chosen, her hand clasped firmly in his, facing cameras and reporters who'd been fed Marco's lies. Dante made a brief statement about their relationship, about how Elena had come to him seeking protection from an abusive ex, about how love had grown between them in ways neither had expected. Then Elena spoke, her voice clear and strong, telling her truth. That she was there by choice, that she loved Dante, that Marco's claims were the desperate attempts of a man who couldn't accept that she'd moved on, that she'd found someone who valued her instead of trying to diminish her. The reporters shouted questions, but Dante ended the conference, leading Elena away with protective authority. That night, Dante didn't come to bed until very late. When he finally slipped beneath the sheets, Elena could feel the tension in every line of his body. "It's done?" she asked quietly, knowing what he'd been doing, where he'd been. "It's done," Dante confirmed. "Marco won't hurt you again. Won't hurt anyone again." Elena felt something complex move through her, not quite guilt, not quite relief. Something in between, something she'd have to learn to live with. She turned to face Dante in the darkness. "Are you okay?" she asked. "No," Dante said honestly. "I'll never be okay with taking a life, even when it's necessary, even when it's to protect everything that matters to me. But I'll learn to live with it, the same way I've learned to live with all the other impossible things this life demands." Elena kissed him, slow and deep, trying to pour understanding and acceptance and love into the connection. "We'll learn to live with it together," she corrected, "because that's what we do now. We carry the hard things together." They made love with a desperate tenderness, clinging to each other like lifelines, reaffirming life in the wake of death. And afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Dante spoke into the darkness. "Marry me," he said, and it wasn't really a question. "Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that choosing me wasn't a mistake. Let me show you every day that you deserve to be loved exactly as you are. Fire and passion and intensity and all." Elena's breath caught. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." The wedding was small, held in the villa's garden under a canopy of roses and lemon trees, with only Maria and a handful of Dante's most trusted men as witnesses. Elena wore a simple white dress, and Dante wore a black suit, and when they spoke their vows, every word was weighted with the truth of what they'd overcome, to stand there together. They promised to see each other completely, to accept the darkness and the light, to be exactly who they were without apology. They promised to burn together, to let their fires merge instead of trying to dim each other. And when they kissed as husband and wife, Elena felt something click into place, a rightness that went beyond words. That night, in their bedroom, Dante gave her a gift, a journal, leather-bound and expensive, its pages blank and waiting. "For your poetry," he said, "for all the words you've kept hidden. I want to read every one, want to know every thought in that beautiful mind. Promise me you'll fill this. Promise me you'll never hide parts of yourself again. Not from me, not from the world." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I promise," she said, "if you promise the same. Promise me you'll keep playing music, keep creating beauty even in the midst of violence. Promise me you'll let yourself be both things, the boss and the artist, the protector and the dreamer." Dante pulled her close. "I promise," he said. "As long as I have you, I can be both. You make it possible." 6 months later, Elena published her first collection of poetry under a pseudonym, verses about love and darkness, about finding yourself in someone else, about burning bright enough to light up the world. It was raw and honest and intense, everything she'd been told to suppress her entire life. Dante read every poem, some of them multiple times, and told her they were proof that being too much was exactly right for someone. Meanwhile, in the music room, Dante started composing again, creating pieces that wove together beauty and melancholy, hope and pain. He played them for Elena, and she understood they were love letters, expressions of feeling too complex for words alone. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from having an easy life, but from finding someone who makes the hard life worth living. Elena and Dante had found that peace, not despite their wounds, but because of them. They were still complicated, still contradictory, still carrying darkness and light in equal measure. But they carried it together. Two people who'd been told their whole lives they were too much, finally finding someone who was exactly enough. If this story touched something deep in your soul, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Comment where you're listening from. And if you felt this was worth your time, consider becoming a member for early access to future stories. And if this story truly resonated with you, click the Super Thanks button. Your support helps us continue creating stories about love that doesn't ask you to be smaller, about finding someone who sees your fire and isn't afraid to burn. Because maybe that's what we're all really searching for. Not someone who tolerates us, but someone who matches us. Not someone who handles our intensity, but someone who burns just as bright. And maybe, just maybe, we're all exactly the right amount of too much for someone out there.